Good afternoon and welcome to this Technology, Architecture, and Design author panel. This is for the TAD Journal's latest issue. It was released in June. It's titled Generative. And we're delighted to have all of you with us today. Thanks for joining for this conversation on the role of generative approaches in the allied design fields. So my name is David Newton. I am a TAD editorial board member and also the issue editor for this particular issue. And I'll be serving as the moderator for today's discussion. So I'll start out talking a little bit about how this issue kind of emerged. So the theme of the issue emerged from my own research, kind of looking into this area. An area that I'm very passionate about, interested in, and that interest in conversation with the full editorial board began to coalesce into a call for papers that really invited scholars, designers, researchers to critically reflect on the use of generative technologies in the allied design fields. So we asked how generative methods from computational design to artificial intelligence are shaping architectural and urban practice, as well as design pedagogy and theory. And so this issue gathers contributions that really interrogate the creative, methodological, and also the cultural stakes of generative technologies in the built environment. And so before we begin with the discussion, I'd like to recognize the editorial team behind this issue of TAD. We have our executive editor, Elise Newman, tireless advocate for the journal. We have also Patricia Keogh, who served as an associate editor for the issue, as well as Matan Mayer, serving an indispensable role as an associate editor, spending tireless hours reading through submissions for this issue and helping to edit those pieces and shape them into what ended up being a really, I think, great issue on a number of levels. So we're honored to be joined today by some of the distinguished authors from this issue, whose scholarship and creative work really are at the forefront of architectural research and practice, and who will share their insights from their contributions to this issue. So first, I'd like to recognize the contribution of Antoine Picon. He's a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design and the chairman of the Foundation Le Corbusier. He's widely known for his work on architecture, cities, and technology. Next, we have joining us Sam Omans. He's an industry and strategy manager for architecture at Autodesk, and he's a faculty member at Yale University School of Architecture. Sam is representing his colleague at Autodesk, Nicholas Mangun, who provided an article for this issue. We also have Thomas Sanchez joining us. He's a professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning at Texas A&M University and chair of the APA Education Committee. From industry, we have Martha Tsigkari, who's a senior partner and head of applied R&D at Foster & Partners. She has extensive experience in computational design and digital innovation, and her colleague, Marcin Kosicki, co-authored a piece for this issue. Marcin Kosicki is an associate partner at Foster & Partners. Next, we have Snoweria Zhang joining us. She's a senior computational designer at Google. She also teaches at the Columbia Graduate School of Architecture. We have Tim Fu, founder of Studio Tim Fu, whose work pioneers the integration of AI into cutting-edge architecture and explores the convergence of generative AI with parametric design. And finally, we have Molly Wright Steenson joining us, CEO and president of the American Swedish Institute and associate professor at Carnegie Mellon University. I wonder if has Elise joined us? Wanted to give Elise an opportunity to talk about the TAD journal. Okay, let me see. Elise, are you there? our executive editor, Elise Newman, tireless advocate for the journal. And were she here, she would talk to you a little bit about the TAD journal. We're an international peer-reviewed journal. We have a distribution mainly across North America. And our focus really is on providing a platform for research and innovation around issues of architecture, design, and technology. So looks like we have a few members from our TAD editorial board joining us as well: Patricia Keogh and Dimitri. So I'll go ahead and start the discussion here.
Dimitri Nicolau, sorry, I haven't changed my name.
Sorry, yeah, it's a bit of it's a name I haven't had to pronounce too often, so plus I was looking to read it. So thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and get into the panel discussion. And so I'll start the panel discussion around the theme of how generative AI challenges conceptions of architectural creativity, originality, and authorship. And I thought Tim's piece for the issue stakes a claim in this area in an interesting way. And I wanted to start the conversation with asking him a couple questions. And if members of the audience have questions as we're going through this, feel free to supply those in the chat, and I'll relay those to the author as it seems like those questions fit. So Tim, in your article for the issue, it's titled "Generative Design Tools Hallucinating with Precision." You provide a review of several generative AI platforms and their potential place within an architectural design workflow. So the question is, does the black box nature of generative AI undermine critical reflection in the design process, do you think? Or can it foster new forms of reflexivity? And if so, what might these new forms of critical reflection look like?
Well, so when we look at AI, generative AI tools, we have to start thinking about them less as explicit tools, but more as a source of potential, such as a director of a design firm who is engaged with various creatives in the team will supply you with various ideas and thoughts. And part of your responsibility as the sort of the spearheading the project, you'd have to, curate the results. You'll have to coordinate the team and figure out which direction to, have the design and what to focus on. So there's a lot of process that goes into thinking about what you're trying to get out of the tool set and the system. So if we were to think of machine intelligence as just like a normal human intelligence in some sense, it is a wealth of ideas and opportunities, and the onus is still on us, the architects, the designers, to mastermind the entirety of the project and uphold the responsibilities of architectural consideration from sociological, cultural, contextual challenges. And so all those responsibilities remain intact. And, you know, speaking about the academia, what they teach us, it's still all relevant, and we hold those values and those responsibilities just as much prior to AI and post AI era tools. So what we should be learning is how to engage with these tools with a critical mind and tackle those challenges and allow generative AI to produce outcomes, but not be swayed by it indiscriminately. Understand the biases in the machine, in the data sets, understand what is the contextual requirements, cultural or heritage requirements, or sustainability requirements, and engage with the tools with that background. So I think everything that we uphold as values for architects still very much remains intact, but now we have to recontextualize those values and these sets of ideologies that we uphold into this new paradigm.
You also discuss in your article how generative AI platforms might challenge existing power structures between different forms of architectural practice. And I wonder what forms of architectural practice might be strengthened and diminished with the use of these tools. This is also has an interesting parallel with the types of maybe critical thought that might be strengthened and diminished.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits in this paradigm shift with artificial intelligence is the democratization of this profession. Um, Speaking from first-hand experience, we've competed uh, neck to neck with huge architectural firms with a lot of background and experience, and of course those are extremely valuable. However, a lot of the things that require a big team or huge production values are a big amount of efforts. A lot of those have been sort of now been expedited in such a way that boutique firms, like we will consider ourselves more in that direction, alongside other uh, smaller firms. AI helps us coordinate these tasks a lot more efficiently to be able to remain competitive next to big offices that have a legacy of decades of standard of practice. And so we find ourselves to be able to really thrive in this domain alongside the more traditional practices. And we have our advantages of doing things a lot faster in a lot shorter of time. And that, in a way, isn't to diminish quality, but actually, for us, it increases quality because when you turn around with a design, for example, after a feedback session, the ideas are fresh, the vision is clear, you present a plethora of options, the client can see and understand where you're going, and you kind of visualize this whole sort of client conversation and how to bring a project into completion, but keeping everything fluid and streamlined. So for that, I think it helps us a lot to be using AI and multitude of AI, not just diffusion AI for generative visualization, ideation, and modeling, but also other forms of AI, like the use of neural network embedded in either in optimization, 3D parametric modeling, as well as other forms that we recently have discovered to become quite efficient, such as the use of converting from hand sketching to visualization to 3D model without traditional 3D modeling, for example. And so I think at least for us dealing with early concept stage to early development phase of a project, that has expedited the entire process and allowed us to put a lot more efforts in multiple projects within short amount of time, so that each project we do, we try to deliver the vision and without being boggled down on so much details and production. So that's one of the many ways we find ourselves to be advantaged by that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a theme we'll pick up again in a little bit. This issue of how generative AI is potentially impacting practice. We'll touch on that with the next couple of other questions in different ways. So building on this kind of discussion, this topic of practice, I have a question for Sam. Sam Omans is here representing his colleague, Nicholas Mangon, from Autodesk, who gave us a great piece for the issue titled Outcome-Based BIM with AI Delivers Transformative Design Opportunities. And that article discusses the potentials of AI for architectural practice. And I wonder, Sam, how do you see architectural practice being affected by generative AI and maybe AI more broadly in the next 5 years? In your view, is AI best thought of as a design partner or as an efficiency tool extending CAD/BIM traditions?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Or David, sorry. Interesting question. I mean, starting kind of with what we see already, I think leading indicators, one is the high-end experimentation. I mean, what Tim was referring to, so R&D at work at firms, institutions, and universities. And there's other practitioners on the panel here engaging in that. The other one is software production itself. So, I mean, at Autodesk, we're tool makers. Nicola and I are on the team where we're setting the strategy for how the tools get made for the various industries. And we're here. I'm actually joining from our user conference, Autodesk University, which is in Nashville, Tennessee. So we've been spending a lot of time this week talking about our new platform, Autodesk Forma. So we're injecting automation, analysis, augmentation into the current stack of solutions that we produce. I think that, the other thing on the leading indicator side that's super interesting, sort of bigger picture, is this shift from stochastic approaches to generative design to a sort of more probabilistic potentials. And I think this is super interesting when it comes to questions of agency authorship, as well as potential gains. So I think over the next 5 years, capacity gains is certainly going to be one of them. The other thing that I bring to the table here is fee structure evolution. So I spoke with the leadership of a $10 billion engineering firm yesterday, and they're already moving towards outcome-based pricing in an effort to sort of get in front of some of these efficiencies that's impacting their business. So signaling real business model change. Longer horizon, so 5 to 10 years. I think the real step change is probably robotics on the job site. So those types of breakthroughs, likely will blur the line between design intent and construction realization in meaningful ways. And accordingly, shifts in responsibility, both risk and accountability, and probably redistribution of those between designers and builders. In terms of the kind of the architect's role in this, I think if we, as architects, can reclaim potentially a master builder type position, and anchor the humanistic values of this discipline into that process, we'd be offering sort of a specific value that I don't think anybody else is going to bring. But in order to do this, I think it really does mean moving beyond drawing production and storytelling alone into the realization of projects. Those are the kinds of shifts that I'm thinking about, we're thinking about over the 5-ish year horizon.
Could you clarify what is outcome-based pricing?
So depending on who you talk to in an architecture firm today, there's some billing by hours and there's other billing by deliverable. Outcome-based pricing, it's a sort of a business model that we see in some other domains, but the conversation I was in yesterday is this firm was setting constraints early on with the client. So the brief was highly deterministic, and then they would be charging based on their ability to hit those sort of predefined outcomes. And the flow of payment was happening at sort of key deliverable timelines determined by the outcome rather than traditional phasing.
Okay, great. Thanks for that distinction. Continuing on this topic of practice, in Marcin and Martha's article for the issue titled "Urban Configurations: Mass Optimization with Real-World Constraints Using High-Performance Computing," they describe how high-performance computation is paired with generative algorithmic design processes to tackle complex optimization problems at the urban scale at Foster and Partners. And I wonder, how do you both see architectural practice being affecting your practice in currently and in the next 5 years, let's say?
I'm sorry, how is what going to affect our practice?
How do you see generative AI and maybe AI
Generative.
more broadly as affecting your practice?
I think there is a plethora of ways by which AI is going to affect everybody. The point is, how are you going to drive that change to your benefit? right? So the way that we see this affecting our practice, and we took steps since before 2020 to achieve that, is to ensure that AI works as an augmenter in our design process rather than a replacement. That's why when we're using diffusion models, for example, through our proprietary AI portal, we do it with self-hosted models that do not jeopardize our IP, and we do it on designs that we've already done. We don't try to have the computer imagine things for us. And also we have invested a lot in using LLMs in all stages of the design, from data sharing throughout the office and knowledge dissemination to financial and operational insights, to name a few things, target models for analysis, etc. Plus, we're doing a huge work around the data, as you've seen from our piece, in order to be able to not just create these big data sets, but also tag them in a way that we can further down the line use them analytically in generative processes with AI. So it's not going to affect us in the sense that these systems are going to design for us, but it's going to help us to augment our creativity, and it's going to work as a design assist during the design process with an eye on full automation in certain parts of the design process. After, through process mapping, we appreciate what agentic types of AI can automate and replace things that we don't need to do manually anymore. Marcin, what would you like to add?
Well, I would just want to add that, the design process requires hundreds or even thousands of decisions that have to be made immediately or with a very limited time frame. So in that picture that Martha has painted, AI would basically aid us at this process, so that those decisions can be made much faster that they would normally take, and some of those decisions can be made based on data and processes and predictions that normally we wouldn't even try to do, because we would never be able to fit the time frame. So this is very much an enabler for us to do better projects, to push the boundaries of what we can do, and speed up the processes that we currently have.
I'm curious. So it seems like at Foster and Partners, you very much see AI technologies as a kind of design partner, not just as an efficiency tool. And so you're kind of actively trying to build a culture around that. I'm curious, how have you gone about kind of building that culture? Because just speaking anecdotally, when I work with my students in design studios, they're many times very apprehensive about using generative technologies because of various reasons, and I wonder, how do you all go about building a kind of culture in your practice of critical, thoughtful engagement with these tools so that they become a design partner and not just a kind of tool for kind of blind blind generation of designs or ideas?
It is not a design partner. I don't know how that comes across from what we say. We do the design. The AI is an augmenter, and it is actually a tool. In the same way that you're using CAD or Revit or simulation engines, we're using AI to automate some processes that we would otherwise take much longer to do, but not in a way that it describes how we design or what the decisions are being made in relation to the design itself. That's why we have architects in the office. And so I don't want to to live with the misunderstanding that AI is a design partner for some partners. It is a tool. It is used as such in order to help us automate and optimize and augment, not to replace. And the way that we ensure that this ethic exists in the office is because we do create our proprietary tools. We have office-wide decencies that explain why these tools should be used over commercially available tools so that we don't jeopardize our copyright and IP, how things need to happen right and in which parts of the process needs to happen. And to do that, we collaborate with a multitude of different teams within the office to ensure that from the way that we structure and we create data to the way that we use and ingest these different systems, tools, and applications that we deploy office-wide, people are doing the right thing to reinforce the four-star partner culture and not to replace it.
I see. But do you see it as more than just an efficiency tool?
I will let Marcin reply to some of this.
Yes, for sure. We see it way more than an efficiency tool. It's something that like we are at the moment at the early stages of the AI revolution. So we are using it very much to make the current process that we know how to do much faster. And we've had great advantages of that. But also, AI will allow us to imagine and change the design process in a way that we are currently not yet know, and that's very exciting. But that is very much, as Martha said, rooted in the design culture of like fostering partners and in general of, I believe, as architecture as a profession as well. So we are all in the design industry because we love the joy of creating new things. And if AI would allow us to push that boundary further and further, it's not just an efficiency tool, it's something that augments our creativity.
I have a question.
Somebody asked about whether it's the beginning of AI. Well, it's the beginning of AI for this third spring of AI. Everybody knows that machine learning started from the 50s, but neither the computational power nor the adoption of software or the data was there in order to allow us to do the things that we can do today. So it is revolutionary. It's growing exponentially. That's not the beginning of it, but it is the beginning of this new kind of hill that we're rising in terms of like exponential AI growth. That's for Molly Wright Steenson, who just asked a question in relation to what we said.
Yeah, Molly, do you want to follow up on that, or?
I'll unmute. Thanks for that. Yeah, every time I hear the term AI, and you know, by way of background, I wrote a book about the history of AI in architecture and design. I wonder which AI, which winter, and whether we're talking about AI at all. And in this room, I'm going to assume that we all have a pretty nuanced understanding of what we mean when we say artificial intelligence. But it's important to question it. I think one of the things about this issue of the journal is all of the ways that we do consider what AI is or has been and might not be. But I find myself always wondering, can you replace the term AI with robot, automation, information superhighway, or digital? And if you can, then perhaps you need to reconsider what you're talking about as intelligence. When I'm saying you, I don't mean Marcin or Martha, I mean just us in general.
No, but I absolutely agree with you, if I'm being honest. And I think the biggest problem is that we're all talking about AI. The reality is that it's all machine learning. This idea of like AGI or AI doesn't actually compute exactly, but it is a wonderful term that everybody knows and uses in a multitude of ways. It is machine learning in most cases, and a lot of the different tasks that you put in, people are now replacing with AI, and that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's so much obscurantism in the topic. It's really troublesome. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and now ask Antoine a couple questions about his contribution to the issue. So I'd like to discuss how generative AI may affect notions of authorship and the architect's role in the design process. So Antoine, in your article, the artificial intelligence, and in your article, I'm sorry, it's titled Artificial Intelligence and Architectural Intention, you shift the focus away from creativity and authorship towards intention. And so I wonder, why do you see intention as a more critical concept for thinking about AI's role in architecture? Oh, I think you're
Thanks.
muted.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Perhaps before that, a couple of things. I'm an historian fundamentally, so I don't pretend to be as savvy as the rest of the panel in terms of the technology. And the second thing, I'm somebody who produces text. And when I'm observing what's happening with text production, I think that the belief that AI will remain, just a tool or an augmentation, just an addition to the process, etc., makes me a bit perplexed, because it is going to change very fundamentally, for example, the way we write, and change very fundamentally what authorship means, what scholarship means, etc., etc. And my guess is that, if we don't face a new AI winter, we're going to see very significant changes in the very fundamentals of the design discipline. So now, why intention? Because I think, there have been a lot of talks about creativity. I think creativity is a very ambiguous notion, because nature is creative. There are a lot of non-human creativity around there. What I wanted to question, and I noted that Sams at some point said how to express humanistic values in design. The expression struck me. What is it we want to convey when we design beyond, the mere usefulness, etc.? Intention for me is actually one of the most fundamental aspects of architecture. In what sense can we say that architecture is a human production? So that's for me. So that's something that has to do, of course, with meaning, with a symbolic, but it has also to do with experience. We have embodied intelligence, and I relate actually this question of intention to the question of the body and embodiment. So for me, it's a more complicated but better way to convey, some of the fundamental questions that AI is bringing to the table.
Does intention remain exclusively a human prerogative, or can the act of interpreting and deploying AI outputs be seen as generating a new type of hybrid form of shared or distributed intention between humans and machines?
That's a very good question. I think that's the question, to start by the practice I know, which is teaching and grading papers. It is clear that, I used to have humans writing clumsy paper in my class. And now I'm actually grading hybrids, kind of cyborg assemblage of ChatGPT and human. And with question, where is the intention? Because part of it is, yes, there is still an intention from the student, but there is also all these implicit intention that have been sedimented through, the data that has been fed to ChatGPT. There are all kinds of things. So yes, I think we are going to see distributed forms of intention. But the real question is, how do we still steer the process, which is what Martha and Marcin were talking about. It is clear that authorship, intention, etc., are going to be much more distributed. That explains why Latour actor network theory has known such a success, because it's quite topical today. But how do we still, in this distributed thing, still assess intention? It's an old question in architecture. Let's not forget that, big architectural practices, we're talking about 10th or sometimes 100th of people, cooperating to a project. So how does, the people at the top still make the project their project was already a question. That was a question for Lord Foster, for example, evidently, given the size of his office. And I think it's so we're going to have this kind of question. So that explains also why I prefer intention to creativity.
Yeah, building on this this notion of this distinction of the embodied existence, human existence, versus that of a machine code stored on a hard drive running through some logic gates. Building on this notion of embodied knowledge, the embodied knowledge that the human brings to the table, and what truly separates a human in a design process versus generative AI tool. Building on that, I'd like to kind of pose a question to all the authors here. Does the proliferation of generative AI tools risk diminishing the tacit embodied knowledge traditionally associated with architectural practice, or can it strengthen this embodied tacit knowledge?
I think that's part, if I may, I think that's part of the challenge for architectural education. It is for me pretty clear that we are going to have to very fundamentally reform architectural education, because it could definitely diminish embodied knowledge, and we have to avoid that. But we have then to teach differently. To go back to my ChatGPT augmented paper, it means that, in my domain, we have probably to consider that, education, the target is shifting. So, and I think the same will be true for design, because in some ways the tools will be more and more powerful. So, and we go back to intention. How do we assert that the students has developed a coherent set of knowledge and from which he can express an architectural intention?
Yeah, that's a great point. I completely agree about the educational point. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can jump in, especially also on the educational front, but I think also in professional work that I see that at least the current set of tooling that's available seems to really be helping us at least communicate, either with students or with clients or with each other. In my own teachings, I see also a hybrid, though not writing. A lot of times it's prototypes, drawings, and it's often with tools that students are not super fluent in, like Python. And rather than spending 3 months becoming a somewhat Python expert, they now have a much more fluid way of prototyping and expressing their ideas. Not so much that they necessarily will have to rely on AI to produce the final result, but it makes that conversation easier. It makes those studio critiques much easier, because now we can look at something, we can all respond to the same things, and see that clear expression of what it is that they're trying to do. And then similarly, professionally, I think that a lot of technological advances have always helped architecture get more precise about what it is that we're trying to do, that we want to achieve. The example that I always like to go to is performance-based zoning, right? If we're the move from, let's say, form-based zoning to performance-based zoning is very much enabled by the ability to actually measure performance in a lot of different ways, which is helping us to really truly get closer to all talking about and measuring the things that we actually care about, rather than a proxy of what it is that we cared about. And all of these generative AI tools, and whether it's actually generative AI or generative design or performance measurement and optimization, all of these tools are actually really helping us to more clearly articulate what we want out of architecture, what we want out of a project.
I mean, I have a slightly different take on that. I think I'm an educator as well. I'm an associate professor at the Bartlett, and I see that AI is having a huge effect in stripping people from the need to develop any domain expertise whatsoever. They're kind of using these tools nonsensically and without critical thinking, and they end up completely writing themselves outside of the equation. Because the reality is that if you rely on these tools without critically thinking what you're doing, and without even having the expertise to check whether what you're doing is right, then this idea of skill commoditization is going to overtake this profession and any profession, unless we really understand how we can implement within the the educational process, the use of these tools in a critical way, we're going to have students who are not going to be able to think for themselves. They are going to be put in front of the client and they will need to ask ChatGPT in order to answer the client's questions, and won't be able to be competitive in the profession in 10 years' time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Elise, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it struck me that, this idea of authorship is actually complicated by the condition we're in now as well, right? I'm not so sure the autonomy of the author is so clear to me anymore. And I go back and think about, the human was challenged by the machine at the turn of the 19th century, in the sense that, it was measured, Taylorism, you think of the idea of managing the human body in relationship to material, right? Was actually what happened then. I think the revolution now is cognitive. I think that one of the things that the machine learning and the way in which we're interacting with machines is that it's kind of becoming an outcome predictor of our own perceptions of the world. And I'm going to use the example here that, if you use Midjourney or any of these sort of image generating softwares right now, if you ask them about Asian architecture, they only actually produce things related to Japanese architecture. So the outcomes are always Japanese, which means that at a certain point, if you're not careful, that's going to be your output too, in terms of your perception of what Asian architecture is. So in other words, there's a kind of training that's happening about our own, about the author, right? The author's being trained by this as well. So I think the problem is pretty complex in that sense. And I certainly agree that intention is critical. I just think there's even has to be a kind of criticality about intention, if that makes sense, right? The intention of the human isn't so clear to me at the moment. I mean, another example you can think about is the recent sort of world condition where what was seemingly unacceptable by the majority of people has become more acceptable by a majority under the influence, a kind of barrage, right, of, in effect, AI producing content that is shifting what norms might be. So I just think that there's a kind of feedback loop here, even in relationship to authorship, that we need to be cognizant of. That just struck me as you were talking.
Just if I may, because I saw a question about, how's it going to change education, and I was quite struck by what Martha says, and I completely agree. I think one of the problem, it forces us to redefine what we consider as knowledge. What should a student know? Because actually, with all these tools, I think it's true, they can use a lot of tools without understanding what this is concretely about. So what does it mean to know something has become the main question, in my opinion, because in some ways the how has become more easier with machines, but the why, what matters, what should I know? To go back to intention, what is my purpose? What is my objective? Those are the big questions that are left unanswered. And education was still very much around the how. Learning, competence, etc. And we need to move a bit more toward, what does matter ultimately. And that's complicated. While not losing, and that's another complication, some degree of technicality, without which, you are in some ways, you cannot critically judge what the machine has achieved.
Sam, did you want to say something? I noticed you had your hand raised there for it.
It loops us back. So let's keep moving in the conversation.
Okay, sounds good. So continuing on the theme of authorship and the architect's role, Molly's article for the issue, it provided really an excellent review of Simon Lindgren's book called Critical Theory of AI. And so in that review, Molly, you highlight Lindgren's point that AI is humans because it relies on human labor and data. So given this entanglement, should we rethink authorship as collective, as distributed across designers, data sets, and algorithms? And if so, what might be the ramifications of this shift in the definition of authorship for the discipline?
First, just if I can actually hold this up, I can't, it disappears.
The AI is erasing it.
Oh my, the erasure begins. This is Simon Lindgren's book, and it was a lucky strike to be asked to review it. I've actually happened to know him from Umeå University in northern Sweden. He's always been an interesting, thoughtful digital sociologist. And one of the things that he wrote in the book is, we are the models. AI is humans, is the section, and we are the models. Technology is socially shaped. Machine learning is a technology, and technology is dependent on what we put in it. And we've been hearing people here talking about what goes into a model. And I was writing with my hand, are people models? And maybe the answer to that question is yes. We are, in fact, the models. Is authorship truly collective? I want to actually re-review your question. My question here would be, is that new? Someone like Friedrich Nietzsche talked about this is Kittler's characterization of it, but Friedrich Nietzsche talked about how using the typewriter acted upon his brain and made him think differently about textual production, about the production of his own ideas and how they came out. I find myself thinking about all sorts of generative devices that we've used throughout art and architecture over time. I come back to Dadaism as its kind of unmaking of things as a generative device. And this makes me think that we've had authorship across different kinds of models and different kinds of technologies in many ways for a long time. And what I found so interesting in this conversation that we're having here is the question of the how, the what, the why, and I'd even argue now the what of what we're teaching or what we're writing about. These days, I'm not in an architectural classroom. I'm running a Swedish museum in Minneapolis, and I'm also connected to some of the Swedish literary scene. And finding these same questions are being asked there, and I'm also a writer. So when I write, I don't sit down to generate content. What I sit down to do is I sit down to engage in a process of myself, my mind, and an interaction with my mind. Now, sometimes I include other entities in that interaction, but I did before as well. So I find myself wanting to always be able to step back and say, what is truly different now? And what can we take from what we already know and where we stand in place and time from other places, because of something else that Simon Lindgren's book writes about, or that Simon Lindgren writes about in his book, which is this is about power. This is about the power drive of a few enormous, enormous companies. And it's about them getting all of the information and all of the data, and it's about totalitarianism. So to that extent, no, I don't think, I don't know if it's collective, or if it is, it's in the way that we might think of geopolitics. And that it's really important to define exactly what we're being, what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about these technologies, because it's not really necessarily in the best interest of people. And yet I still remain fascinated by them. So I don't know. Is it truly collective? Yes, but it's always been.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's reflecting on the use of really the world around us, tools, even like, Google search in order to inform our thinking. That boundary, between mind and environment and cognition and environment has never been as clean as has been portrayed by some people. And I think you're right to kind of reflect on, is there a real difference in what's happening now in terms of the the rise of more modern generative AI? Maybe there is a phase transition that does mark a true distinction. But that's the question we have to grapple with, I suppose, right?
I'm looking at a question from Catherine Mylan in the chat about the biophysical impacts of design and large language models. And if we want to think about sort of the mangle or the great big knot that forms, then actually this authorship is an authorship with water and natural gas and data centers and a lot of other things that are there as a part of that authorship. So there could be some interesting things. I find myself thinking of Antoine's recent work as well, and how we might see climate and authorship build into these questions of architecture and AI.
Yeah, no, that's a really fascinating point, and thanks for addressing some of the audience questions. I'm hoping to work a few more in as we kind of finish out our live. I have two more questions, one for Tom and one for Snoweria, and then we can kind of open it up after that if we still have time. But I'd like to shift gears a little bit and discuss very briefly some of the social and ethical implications of generative AI. And I thought Tom's article was a good point, a good departure point for that discussion. So Tom, in your article titled "Planning with Generative AI for Creativity, Global Insight and Fairness," you discussed some of the potentials of generative AI for urban planning and design, while also discussing some of the ethical dimensions of that issue. So are there new forms of urban knowledge or possibility being produced? Or do you think these tools risk reinforcing existing, often exclusionary visions of urban design and planning?
Yeah, great question. It's been a wonderful conversation. A lot of the way that I look at AI, generative AI, for planning is really as a knowledge management tool. And so when we think about somebody like a consultant coming on, the reason why we're hiring them is because they have some experience with, certain kinds of projects or work. They have that history, and now we're able to model a lot of that experience if it happens to be in a digital form. Typically, a lot of that written, but it could be visual. And so I think just like our own minds, the way that we train these models, like you referred to, and that's been one of the concerns. Hey, if we're training these models with some of the historic data that produced things like redlining and discrimination and just poor land use patterns, are we just gonna continue to make the same mistakes? And so I think that's really and I think that's thinking about, the tool, the knowledge management, the thing like large language model fairly simply, because we can use our technologies to help correct for those mistakes, or at least look for those biases, look for those problems in the training, hopefully. I can't see, or I hope not, that it would ever be a situation where we would be relying on some of these outputs without review, without kind of, the human in the loop, if you will, or some kind of expertise being part of that. But who knows? We have adversarial models that are supposed to, help us, find those sorts of things. So anyhow, on the bias side, to be honest, I'm really more afraid of the human bias that we have in place right now, with people in positions of power, what they're able to do, and the impact that they have on policy. Then maybe I'm being short-sighted right now, but we've got a lot of bias and misinformation and disinformation that we still need to figure out on the human side before we kind of get too carried away with, what's on the horizon. Although, given the investments that are being made, and what we're seeing with TSMC and NVIDIA, and the investments in these data centers and all, this is gonna go beyond kind of the digital knowledge that we have in place, where we're going to be capturing real time what's happening in the world, and that's going to be part of the outputs that we'll receive. And think along the lines of something like a digital twin in that sense, which I don't know how, the real potential for something like that, given really ultimately it comes down to the biggest black box in all of this is the human mind. And, and we're still trying to figure that out. So a little bit rambling there, but the bias side, the bias part of this is throughout, whether it's the machine or the human who's flipping on the switch.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. I've got one more question for Snoweria, and then we'll have to wrap up. So my question is building on this issue of ethics, and in Snoweria's article for the issue titled "Generative Design for Decarbonization, a Global Framework for Quantifying and Mitigating Emissions in Early Stage Building Design," she discusses a generative design methodology to address environmental issues and also their social costs through empowering architects to better understand the carbon impact of their designs. So my question would be that Snoweria, you kind of you emphasize this tool, and I guess one question would be, as AI tools begin to shape architectural knowledge and practice, who should be held accountable for the ethical consequences of their use? Should it be the tool makers, the designers who use them, or the institutions that validate their outcomes?
I don't know if it's cop-out to say everybody, but I'm going to say everybody. But at least on our front, as the tool makers, we certainly take ownership and take responsibility of everything that we're making, down to, I own every single line of code that I write, whether it's completed by autocomplete or typed on a typewriter or generated by AI or copied over from Stack Overflow, right? I'm the ultimate owner. And then similarly with the methodology, this is actually what motivated us to get published, is to get other people to actually validate our approach as well, to make it transparent, to be held accountable for those methodologies that we're putting to practice. And similarly, what actually happens after the tool is built, the tool user has to be responsible and take ownership of that. And I think maybe a related discussion that always comes up in these kinds of things is whether AI is a tool or an agent. And I think with that question comes with different, perhaps like moral weight of how much responsibility you can ascribe to it. And that I think has actually, that conversation has changed a lot since, we probably all were writing our articles a year ago, and that conversation has changed so much, even just in the last year, and it's still shifting.
Yeah, it's incredible, the speed of change. Well, it's been a great conversation today. We could spend obviously many more hours discussing these topics. We'll have to bring it to a close. I just want to really thank the authors who submitted and contributed pieces to this issue of TAD. Thank you to those who are able to join us in the panel discussion. Thank you to the TAD editorial board. Thank you, Elise, for your tireless leadership of the journal. And thank you to the audience for all your participation. There are a number of wonderful questions in the chat that we just didn't have the time to get into, but I'm sure you could feel free to contact any of us if you'd like some thoughts on those questions. Okay.
And just quick one, thanks, David, for doing this. Bravo.
Of course. Thank you. Yeah. Good to see everybody. Thank you so much.